Hey everyone, welcome to the discussion we're going to have. We're going to talk about mixing and mastering. We've got a great, like Amanda said, we've got a great panel of people. And I wanted to start out with actually getting them to introduce themselves. I'd love all of you to talk about a little bit about what you do, and also tell us a little bit about how you got to the place where you're at in terms of your work, either as an artist or as a mixing engineer, mastering engineer, or any and all of the above. So Josh, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Gloria and Heba and on to Isaac. Yeah, go for it.
Hey, I'm Josh. Started making electronic music in about 1993. Um, did so very badly for a long period of time. I guess now, aside from kind of making my own music and working with other artists on their music, um, I like to think of myself sort of as a Winston Wolfe of problem solving with musical projects of almost any kind. But if I'm being really honest with myself, it's probably a lot more like a musical janitor. Uh, People have problems with their records, they come to me and I try to fix them. So that involves mastering a lot of the time, mixing a lot of the time, production a lot of the time. Um, kind of, I guess I'm kind of a shortstop when it comes to sort of filling in a role that needs to be filled in for making a record. So I think now I've made maybe almost 80 records, I guess, since I started in some form of either mixing or producing. Mastering, I have no idea how much. That number is much larger. Um, but that's about it. I kind of make records on my own, and then I help other people make their records as much as I can.
Great, very cool. Gloria, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Gloria Cava. I am a recording and mix engineer, producer, and songwriter. I got my start, right out of college. I got a job at a major recording studio called Manhattan Sound Recording,
Cool.
and I started out as a runner. And after about 3 years of doing that, I made my way up to assistant engineer, where I was in a position where I could be in the room with, a very diverse group of artists, from your major Broadway cast recordings to mainstream artists like Beyonce, Madonna, Kanye, Frank Ocean, Aretha Franklin, among many others. That wasn't me.
I don't know where that came from.
That was
That,
definitely me. Sorry, I live on a pretty busy street.
you guys asked about my start. So yeah, so I was able to be in the room with a very diverse group of artists and projects. And after a few years of doing that, I went freelance. Because of the connections I made while working at the studio, I was able to do that. And one of my main gigs was working closely with Q-Tip as one of his engineers, which
Right.
led to work on a Tribe Called Quest final project. And while working on that, we had everyone come through, from Jack White, Andre 3000, Anderson Paak, Kendrick Lamar, among many others. And
Fantastic.
also worked on Solange's A Seat at the Table as an engineer. And then in the past few years, I've been doing mostly production and mix work. But that's kind of been my path up until this point.
Very cool. Can I just ask you a quick question? When you were starting out as a runner and then assistant engineer, were you, how did you manage, how did you see where you were going? And did you know that you wanted to go all that way, or what was your plan?
Well, as a young person, my dream was to be a producer and writer. Once
Mhm.
I got into studios in college as an intern, I started to be educated on the role of the engineer. So I don't know that I saw my path the way it ended up, but it all seemed to make sense.
Sure.
And one role informed the other. So obviously, the engineering experience made me a better producer and writer, and so on and so forth. So no, I didn't see it working out that way, but it's worked out, and it's made me just a better all around creative.
Very cool. Great. Heba, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Heba. I'm a mastering engineer here in Brooklyn, New York, and I I'm Egyptian. I got my start as a jingle writer in an advertising agency in downtown Cairo, and I didn't really think audio or music was something I could really pursue until I sort of started writing jingles because I was classically trained on piano and loved music passionately, but it just wasn't something I really even knew about. And so, one thing led to another. I wrote a big jingle for a Cadbury commercial, and I had to go to like the really big studio in Cairo, and it was like there was like an SSL console and big Genelec monitors and like lots of outboard gear, and I was like, how do I become that guy? And so I asked the engineer, and I was like, hey, what do I need to do to be the person with the knobs? And he was like, you need to go to audio school. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna do that. So I made my way to the States. I went to a school, and I did my like undergrad in like theater and business and like boring shit. But I was like, I didn't really want to commit to like a full audio school thing, like the really expensive ones that we have here. So I did a short program at the recording workshop in Ohio, which was great. It was 3 months. It was all I needed to know, signal flow, and it was like, low commitment. And then, yeah, I just started interning at a recording studio after that in Houston, Texas. And then one thing led to another. I went to one of the tape op conferences in New Orleans back when they used to have them, which they were so cool. And I saw Greg Calby talk, and he's a famous mastering engineer here in New York. And I was like, this is so cool. This is, I don't really know much about mastering. And I decided this was something I had to pursue. So came to New York. I worked at a big studio in the city. Couldn't really get my foot into the actual studio, but I was just kind of doing admin stuff the whole time. And once everyone was gone and left me to be, I could go in to the studio and try to teach myself how to master and just use references and bands that I've met along the way that when I first came here. And so, yeah, at some point I was like, time to leave and start my own thing. And so here I am.
Very cool. That's a great answer. Isaac, why don't you tell us about yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Isaac. I DJ and produce, engineer, do mixing and mastering for other people. I go by DJ Swisha. I started making music, electronic music around 2012, 2013, but I've done music my whole life. My dad's a musician. But yeah, I moved to New York around 2017, and that's kind of when like music got more serious for me, and audio engineering is kind of a newer thing. I was like always really critical about it because I always wanted to like release music and like make money off of it instead of like paying a lot of money down to like artwork and like the mixing and mastering. So I kind of just like self-taught myself how to make my music sound best, in my opinion. I started off DJing mostly, so my ear for making music and everything is kind of like DJ focused. In 2016, I did RBMA in Montreal, and that kind of like opened my eyes to the whole like full circle thing of it, because I was really just in my bedroom living at my mom's place 2016, like I was 20 years old. And I kind of just from there leaned into the whole practice, and then moving to New York definitely kickstarted me to like make music my full-time things. So I was like doing DJing heavy, but then towards the end of 2019, I got a studio space with a few friends, and then we kind of just started operating that as like our main focus. And especially since the beginning of this year with COVID hitting, we like switched gears a lot, like I'm sure all of us have. But for me personally, I went from just being like DJing, producing, and then yeah, now I'm just kind of like sitting in my studio all day working on other people's music. That's about it.
That's very cool. I think it's just interesting also to notice the kind of the variance of all the different experiences that everybody's talking about, and how much practical learning and how much self-teaching and how much learning from other people and learning from who you collaborate with too is all really important to everybody's growth. And I think that's something that I think a lot of folks who are listening will be interested to hear about. Just to give my own rundown, I am a musician, producer, DJ, and engineer. I have, for the last few years, have this studio in Brooklyn that I run, and was simultaneously running that with a studio that I was keeping in Berlin because I was living in Berlin for about 10 years. Got my start by DJing a lot and trying to learn how to produce, and by working with other producers who had more kind of instructional learning from schools, from audio schools and stuff. I picked up a lot of tips that way and really just learned by doing it. And now I, in addition to making my own stuff, I run, like I said, this studio where I help other folks as well with mixing and mastering and some audio post-production stuff, and doing kind of like what Josh talked about, being an audio janitor at times and helping people kind of nudge their things a little bit further along the way. One of the things that I think people are going to want to ask about, or sometimes a question that comes up, it's something that comes up when clients reach out to me a lot, is this question of what is mixing and what is mastering, and kind of trying to define those two worlds. And I thought that maybe we would start and have some explanations by that, or about those boundaries. And I thought maybe, Gloria, you would be great to explain sort of what the boundaries are and what the process of mixing and mastering is. And then we can ask Heba to talk about what mastering is and the difference between that and mixing.
Right. So when it comes to mixing, I'm usually contacted by an artist or engineer or a label, whatever it is, once the project has been recorded. And the process of mixing is basically taking that material, the recorded and programmed material, leveling it out, and finishing it off with use of panning and EQ, dynamic, um, controlling the dynamics with compression, controlling the dynamics with compression, and applying time-based effects like reverb, delay, and so on, to make this finished song. And then at the end of that process, I toss it off to once it's been approved, I toss it off to Heba for mastering.
Mastering is sort of like I always call myself like the finisher. And, a lot of times you get these projects that have been mixed for a period of time, or mixed by several different mixers, maybe recorded over the duration of like sometimes 10 years. And so it goes through a lot of hands. And then, there is a portion of the time where it needs to come and get funneled to one person. And that's usually the mastering engineer, completely fresh, objective, very out of the picture, really kind of person to jump in and really kind of tie all the loose ends and finish the project up. And sometimes I'll get a project that was entirely mixed by Gloria, for example, or sometimes you'll get a project that was mixed by like, Gloria and maybe two other people. So you are the person that kind of comes in and really is the unifying vision for the record. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you come in and you like completely change things and you make it sound completely different. A lot of times you get really great sounding mixes, and it's kind of up to you and your skill and your know-how to know when you got to have like the hands-off, light touch approach, as opposed to like really digging in and changing things if needed. Because sometimes, you work on a project and like, if it was mixed by 3 different people, 4 different people, sometimes like, the 4th person might have been mixing in a very different environment, and the mix just really is not gelling well with everyone else's. So like, it's really your role to like really try to find a way to kind of get everything to really sit well next to its neighbor. And then of course there's the more technical post to that, which is like creating all the production parts, and by parts like the final masters that go to all the various mediums, whether for vinyl cutting or for DSPs or and so on.
That's great. That's a super thorough answer. I think that's really helpful. I also wanted to see if maybe Josh and Isaac, the two of you, could talk a little bit also about how you balance your best practices as both as artists and as working on other people's work, and how you approach those two things differently. Isaac, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, I kind of just got into the idea of audio engineering just through my own music, and also like I'm a part of a collective called Juke Bounce Work, and once I joined around 2015, it was like a lot of us kind of joined together just because it was a party series, and it kind of pivoted to be a collective / label. So we kind of just had like a lot of creatives from around the world, literally. Like it's only like a handful of us that was making music, but it was just like a lot of us kind of like having a purpose to make music aggressively and like collaborate. So a lot of the times we were just like pumping out so much stuff. So I kind of got into like a weird manic phase of like, if somebody sent me a like song that was exported at like -10, and like, because I usually DJ on CDJs, I would just be frustrated and like have to crank the volume all the time, whatever. So, and I'm also like, when I DJ, I'm very conscious about EQing and shit. So I'm just like aggressively analyzing like audio. So I kind of was just like giving people masters of like their music without them even asking for it at first. Because I would just be like, yeah, I would do this for myself just to like DJ smoothly. So yeah, from there I kind of started doing projects for Juke Bounce Work, a lot of compilations, because there'd be like 20 to 40 songs in the compilation, and a lot of them would be mastered already. Some of them would be good pre-masters. Some of them would be like, it's like, you never know. So I kind of just was there to like help out, because a lot of our projects we were like using to fund other releases to put on vinyl or like whatever, parties and all that. So that's kind of where I really got comfortable with getting into being an engineer, just because it was music I was familiar with, especially like footwork center music. I just already knew like little things that like were easy to make it sound better and just boost dynamics. But lately, within the past year and a half, I've been like taking on all types of projects. So having a studio space, I do a lot of like in-person work, mainly just for like other producers too, because I feel like people come to me because what I've like done for my own stuff usually. So like they know I'm like reliable with mastering dance music, whatever it is, kind of genre, doesn't matter. But yeah, so kind of just got into it from like putting it out there that I do on my own mixing and mastering, and also just like doing stuff for friends. So yeah, kind of just naturally built up, and then having a studio, it just like made me want to get into it more, just to like utilize my time and my space and just actually profit off of it. So yeah, I do a lot of like, I feel like people come to me mostly for like compilations for some weird reason, because I just like can crank out stuff really quick, because I usually just use Ozone. Sometimes I'll use like outboard stuff, but nothing crazy. I'm really not like formally taught at all, and like I know some like terminology and all that, of course, but I'm very like, just I trust my ear, and I kind of like have my references I trust, so I just kind of stick to what I know, and it works out pretty well.
It's interesting that you talk about how people send you compilations because they know that you do that. And I think maybe everybody can kind of relate on some level to when you've done something, it becomes really typical that everyone sees you as the person that does X, and you get more of that work. And then you try to spread that out and branch out into other things. Maybe Josh, you want to talk about that, and also about some of the things that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a pretty similar trajectory to Isaac, in that in the 90s, with all this hardware and, you know, external hardware sequencers and stuff like that. Recording music at the time for me was literally just getting all of my machines to play together and recording it to a DAT. And I remember, you know, listening back to the sound quality of it, it was always totally hot garbage. And it was really frustrating to me that my music didn't sound good. And so I guess out of necessity, I just sort of took a long, slow, iterative look at how to get better at making things sound good. And that involved, you know, asking a lot of questions to people that I met that were better at it than I did. And you sort of pick things up as you go, and you get better at it the more you do it. And because you're pretty much, anytime you mix something, there's a new problem that you have to solve. And usually it involves, you know, something that needs to be corrected in some way, or something that isn't achieving its potential in a mix. And you have to sort of apply all of your knowledge to that. And then you flip through a sort of triage in your mind of possible ways to fix this problem. and maybe the first or the second one aren't the right solutions, and you go to the third or the fourth solution to sort of make the thing work in the context of the mix. As far as getting pigeonholed, I'm like the noise guy mastering engineer. Like if you have like something really noisy, really just completely fucked up, and it's just, you know, the two mix is too loud, it's already clipping, it sounds like shit, and you have like 70 of them, and you need them to sort of conform and to be phase coherent for vinyl and all that sort of stuff. I tend to do pretty good with that kind of stuff, but you know, of course, luckily I haven't been completely pigeonholed. I still get to work on a lot of records from kind of all over the spectrum: jazz stuff, ambient stuff, pure electronic, dance music, whatever, all of it. I like doing all of it because I sort of enjoy the science behind sound, and that's sort of interesting to me, you know, regardless of whatever the source material is. But yeah, necessity. I didn't learn it. I didn't go to school for it. I kind of just whacked away at it over 6 or 7 years, and then got lucky enough to wind up in a room with Alan Moulder at one point, working on some Nine Inch Nails stuff, and then at that point, I mean, I spent 18 hours at the desk there at Nothing Studios in New Orleans, just with a pen and a pad, and just absolutely just punishing, just beyond punishing, just executioner style question asking of every knob move that Alan made, and he answered patiently and cogently every question. I think I still have those notes somewhere. I don't know where, but I picked up a lot from him. Later, a couple of years later, maybe 2002 or 3, I was assisting Terry Date on a mix, and I picked up a lot from him. And then over the years, you just sort of add that knowledge to kind of your own experience of like, wow, I did this thing and I thought it sounded really great, and actually in context, it's pretty terrible. Okay, well, where's the weakness in my ears for this? What did I do wrong? What can I do better next time?
Right. That's very cool. I love hearing about how each project is a learning experience. I think that's something that probably everybody can relate to. Gloria, what kind of stuff have you learned sort of lately, or things that have challenged you lately that you feel like are expanding your remit as an engineer and an artist?
Lately, you know, like he said, it's each mix presents a different problem, but also stylistically, I do challenge myself to work on different styles of music. And lately, I guess I've been getting more pop mixes, but also the requests are usually, hey, we want this to sound current, but also old school. So I've been doing a lot of, and it makes sense too, because, you know, one thing I think some artists get insecure about is that they don't have the technical knowledge. And I'm all about adjectives, like give me whatever comes to your mind, old school,
Sure.
Motown, lo-fi, like whatever it is. So I usually get all of those things and I have to make sense of it. And it usually comes together. I can usually parse like what they're trying to say. You know, punchy drums, crisp but warm, or you know, whatever it is. So they're not really, no, I would say learning experiences in that it's you know, just trying to figure out what the person is trying to say, and and figuring out how I can continue that vision, because most of the time as a mix engineer, I'm not involved in the process before that point as a producer or as an engineer. So it's really about relating to people and just helping them continue the vision and the path they're on.
That's a really nice way of putting it. And it makes me actually think about this other question that I wanted to put out to all of you, which is, how do you balance this? How do you balance knowing that there are some things that people come to you for what you're known for or wanting your imprint on it, and knowing also how to balance that with what you think the artist's idea is and what they're trying to put forward? And how do you figure out how to put your own imprint on it, or how much of your own imprint to put on it? Anybody can take that one.
Well, I can you know, pull up a recent example. Actually, it was a project Gloria and I were working on, and if you remember, Gloria, the artist had reached out to me. You guys had a kind of a not great mastering experience, and The artist was like, we really need this mastered ASAP. And I was like, you know, in the middle of a pretty intense project. And I was like, well, let me hear the mix. And, you know, she sent me Gloria's mix. And with every mix, the artist will usually send like a limited ref, you know, just kind of like a quick master that people, the mixer sends to the artist just to kind of get their ears calibrated to like what it will sound like in the real world. But then ultimately a mastering engineer most of the time masters the mix and then it goes out. But it's always good to send those sort of fake masters because I listened to Gloria's mix and then her limited sort of fake master and I was like, this sounds amazing. You know, you don't need me. They ended up putting it out as is and then there are instances where like you have to be kind of like brutally honest, like, you know, this mix is not good. Like it needs work. If you're allowed the space to give that opinion, of course, because there are instances where you come in as just like literally like a hired gun and you just have to try to finish it through and like nobody wants your opinion. But then, and those are not really my favorite projects. My favorite projects are the ones where like there's a collaboration. I've probably worked with the mixer or the producer or the artist quite a few times. They know exactly, like I know what I'm getting from them and I know what I'm going to be putting out back because like we've just had that rapport. And yeah, we can be completely honest and direct and like really give the best, you know, the best product basically.
That's cool. Isaac, you had talked earlier about how a lot of your mastering work kind of is inspired by knowing what you want to hear as a DJ. And I was wondering if maybe you could talk about that a little more, because I think that's sort of one of those things that's a combination of the two, where somebody comes to you because they know what you've done and want to get your print on it, but also you know where you think it should be steered.
Yeah, I mean, my usual process with any work in this realm is I don't really like to do a lot of mix down work remotely. I feel like I try to save that for in person because it's like such a like fragile kind of thing for a lot, especially in the producer setting. Like I feel like everyone's process is like a part of how it's gonna sound, and like I don't want to sit there and like fully have to like pretty much remix someone's stems to like make it sound how like it should sound in my head. But yeah, so like in general, I always try to tell people like if I hear something off the bat, like, hey, this clap or something could be louder, but I'll still like do the chain of mastering and just try to like work with it and then be like, hey, this is how this is sounding. But if you literally just made this one thing louder, it would like cut through better. And I kind of like try to do that for people before I even like really like talk about anything final, because I just want things to sound good. But I also like for mastering, I'll just ask people to always send me like a reference track that they want, like they see their stuff sounding like. So that is kind of like the main things I like try to just go from, just reference track, and also just see what the person's like style is with their overall like production and mixing, because I can get something super lo-fi or I can get something really clean where like I can tell that their mixing isn't like the best, and then I'm just like, hey, like you could do this. I'm not saying you have to, but like it's up to you. But yeah, I feel like I kind of keep things pretty simple. I don't really do a lot of processing, but I kind of let people know that like their mix down is like what's gonna really like influence how the master is gonna sound. Because like of course you could like say anything, like Josh said, like a fully clipped peaking thing, like you can work with it and make it sound a lot better. But I try to always tell people like, yeah, if your mix down is solid, like the master is going to be that much better. So yeah, I feel like a lot of people usually just want to hear their stuff loud. So my approach is usually just to make things at the loudness that I like LUFS wise, I guess. I kind of just go down to that and I just like crank it and hear it that loud, and then assess from there what needs to be like more pronounced or if anything needs to be dialed back and all that. That's pretty much it.
That's an interesting way of approaching it, that like you're kind of testing it, seeing what works or what putting it in its sort of final stage to figure out then from there what it might need. Are there other things that any of the rest of you do that are sort of like that, where you test the waters first or try something out and then bring it back to see where you came from it?
Yeah. I have kind of a, I guess you could say, sort of a neurosis about having too much of my thumbprint on anyone's mix. This applies mostly to mixing for me. People come to me because they want it to sound like something else I've mixed, probably most of the time. And so I'm always kind of trying to position myself not necessarily as somebody with an agenda in a mix, aside from just having the thing sort of achieve its sonic potential, right? But I think in the course of that, just because I wasn't formally trained or anything, I think kind of no matter what, a little bit of sort of my hidden agenda, my sort of subconscious agenda shows up in the mix anyway, and kind of gives it a sound. I guess too much reverb, snare, really, 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 really loud. This kind of stuff. There's sort of telltale signs. Oh, Josh mixed that. It's like, oh yeah, like took the song, but like dumped a bunch of honey on it, gave it a honey bath. Okay, I try to not do that, because I think that if I did that consciously, it would just be too much of me all over the thing, and I don't want to have sort of my little personal sense of aesthetics. Sort of, I don't want to edge out the artist there. I want the artist to shine. It's sort of my job to be a scientist about it and help them get across the finish line without stumbling, I guess.
Are there things, because we have a lot of folks who are watching that are probably working on music on their own and trying to improve there, are there things that any of you find that you regularly encounter that you would always advise everybody to try to think about when they're working on improving their mixes?
Yes.
Josh, please.
Your mix is bad. The thing that you can do, the first thing you can do to make your mix better, is take all of your tracks and pull them down. Pull down those volumes. Gain stage. Just pull them down. I promise you, it's too loud. Whatever you're sending, it's probably too loud. Just pull them all down a little bit. Just ease up off that tube mix a little bit off the master channel. Give it a little bit of space. I'm not saying make everything minus 18 dB or whatever. You should be coming in nice and loud at the tube mix, but generally, most problems of space and things stepping all over each other can be fixed by just pulling your volumes down.
Gloria, you got any tips?
One.
Oh, go ahead. Heba, please.
My biggest pet peeve is sibilance. I absolutely hate it so much. It's such a bummer. Like, I always tell people, like, look at your waveform. Like, if your S's and your plosives are louder than the rest of your vocal, you need to control that. Because what ends up happening is, like, you just have a song that's like someone singing and it's like, it's like, you just daggers in your ear. And then on the down chain, it becomes problematic with cutting and so on. And then, so what I do is, like, if they can't de-ess it, then I go in and I just, like, notch every single sibilance out selectively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you put a de-esser, if you put a de-esser on the 2 mix, then it's just you're gonna lose all of your high mids and all of the energy. So it has to be treated separately, and it's really time consuming. Like, I could be working on making the song sound great. So yeah, it's like the first thing I kick back is sibilance and turn your cymbals down.
Can you, just for any folks who are watching who don't know, and you've sort of already given a good example of it, but tell us what sibilance is so that folks watching understand what you're talking about.
So sibilance is when your certain transients, when you're talking, like, things like your S's, those become so much more pronounced than the natural world. And it's just because of, like, the way the mic is positioned. Maybe there's no pop filter, like there's no compression. It becomes really way too intimate in a way that's, like, too much. And it needs to sound more natural, because we don't normally sound insanely sibilant. Usually some problem in the recording process or bad monitoring. People are listening on really dark monitors, like they can't even hear how bad the sibilance is, or even, like, if their cymbals are too loud, or things in the high end that are just not being revealed. So by the time it comes to mastering, I brighten things up. All that stuff becomes so much more prominent. So Yeah, you're gonna save me personally a lot of grief if you DS your vocals properly.
Sure. Yeah. Gloria, anything that jumps to mind?
Yeah, a few common problems that I usually encounter are definitely distortion, distorted mixes that are way too hot, and also muddy mixes where there's a lot of buildup in the mid range. So definitely, I think the probably the my top tip would be to use references. Try to find mixes that you think are great, or songs that have been released that you like, and A B them between your mixes and try to find out where those the points as far as their frequency spectrum that are preventing your mix from sounding clear and crisp. But those are probably the main things I see.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think both Gloria, both you and Heba have both mentioned monitoring is an issue. And I end up having this conversation with folks a lot who always want to like figure out how to get the most expensive monitors they can find and think that that's going to be like the golden key to them making better mixes. And often one of the pieces of advice I give people a lot is spend more time fixing your room than spending a ton of money on monitors. Of course, it's always great if you can and if you have access to incredible monitors, that's great. But having a room that you know and a room that has a lot of its acoustic problems already solved will help you hear very clearly what you're dealing with. And it's like having a magnifying glass on your mix and will make a big difference. Isaac, anything that you encounter that you think people need to think about?
I think Gloria's point is really like the biggest thing for me because I don't do too much vocal work or just stem work in general. So for me, I'm usually dealing with something that's mixed already and then I just have to master it. And it's like the last like stretch before it gets released. So I feel like most people usually come to me and it's usually like they've referenced it and they've gotten it down and I'm just there to like brighten whatever's going on. So yeah, mainly just like referencing and what you said, like I feel like a lot of it is that people don't really take the time to like think about what they're hearing in their space for one, and how like what the applications are and like just all of that kind of like where like the like just what the music is going to be doing in general. So for me, a big way that I got comfortable with like knowing that my music needed to be more loud or more dynamic was through DJing. So like if you just literally like can use any DJ software in terms of like having a mixer. So like if you are doing, it's like easier when you have like a physical mixer, but a lot of times I'll find myself boosting knobs or like the mids or the highs. And if you're seeing yourself do that, or like even just toy with the knobs of anything and just see if it sounds better when you're like cranking it up or turning it down, because I feel like with dance music, it's a really big, like the biggest application of it is like the DJs and like it getting played out and everything. And also like it's mostly online and just listening to things over the internet. So it's like, it's really subjective and you can do whatever you want, but I feel like you just have to kind of know the playing ground and like where your music is going to be applied more and just think about it in that sense. So like in the grand scheme of things, just reference, also DJ your music and like DJ next to the music that you like and you want to like compare yourself to, if even that. So like, yeah, for me, it's mainly just like everything down to like my production was really informed by DJing and like seeing where I was lacking and like kind of just building off that. Yeah, mainly just referencing things and making sure that like you know what you're looking for and what you're hearing in your space, because I'll get things that are just like completely just out of whack and I'm like, yeah, you got to do this and that. And it's not really anything very like make or break for me. Like I'm always able to like help people out and get things sounding better. But yeah, I feel like it's just really like familiarizing yourself with what you have and your resources and making the best of it. Because for the longest I produced on like computer, like desktop speakers and like a fake little sub. And then I just like referenced on like Apple earbuds and stuff. So that made the most sense to me and it ended up working out. And like even those old mix and masters that I'd hear from like 2014, I would like hear somebody play it out in a club. I'm like, this sounds better than like some of the masters I paid somebody to do for me. Like it's crazy. So yeah, it's pretty subjective, honestly. Like as long as you, the one thing that Heba said, that's my biggest like point of reference for some reason, just specifically the Serato waveform colors. Like that is like the final thing for me, because like it's very transparent in terms of like just the bass representation and like how your highs are coming in, like when it drops out. But that's mainly like for the final master, but it could help with your mix too, just to see where like you're at in the range. But yeah, like metering and just looking at the waveforms for me is like my biggest final test.
That's a really interesting point of view. That's good. That's great. Because also, I mean, I'd imagine that given how much you DJ, that's also how you see other tracks and other masters and mixes, that you know how those work. And so it gives you a good visual reference point to other mixes as well.
Yep.
I wanted to throw something out to all of you as well, for folks who might be watching at home and are curious about getting or inspired by what you're doing and curious about how to get to where you are. What kind of advice would you give folks who wanted to try to find their way into what you do, and what kinds of paths would you recommend they start out with or look towards?
Wow, there's so many different paths. There really is no blueprint. I'd say when you're starting out, just find colleagues and peers to work on, where you can practice your mixing, you know what I mean, for free, so that you have the freedom to experiment and make mistakes. But also networking is important. Still, for me, that's an important part of my process. And if you find artists you like, reach out to them on social media. If they're indie artists that you have access to, go to shows and really market yourself. But you have to be aggressive in getting your name out there, and start off with work that you can get. So if you're working with friends who are also creatives, reaching out to artists who are accessible, that's probably the best way to start. And then you'll over time build a resume and be able to contact higher profile labels or management, or whatever the case may be. But you just have to be aggressive in trying to get that work.
It's great. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I think it's really like sort of the golden era to become an engineer, because DAWs have never been cheaper. Yeah. Like gear has never been cheaper. Plugins have never been better or cheaper than they are right now. So like literally you can get, I mean, specifically if you want to do mastering, like I would recommend getting Samplitude, which is sort of the cheaper sister or brother of the DAW that I use, which is Sequoia. You don't need an Apple laptop or computer. You can get a PC, you can go to Micro Center, and they're really not that expensive. And you can, if it breaks, you can get another one. You won't like have to spend like $10,000 like Apple makes you think with their like recent computer, which was it 10K or maybe more? I can't remember. So yeah, you could just get started, and like referencing. I mean, like Isaac was saying, like reference. Like it's really weird to me how people now think referencing is like a dirty word. It's not. It's like, that's how I started. And like really with mastering, like I think out of all of the fields, it is the most self-taught field, because it's so niche. Yeah. And like the second most important thing with regards to mastering is like your listening skills. Like you really just have to listen a lot, and like figure out, like get to a point where you can like instantly like hear like a click that no one else would have heard. And that takes, listening on headphones and quiet volume, and like being, both passive and active listening, doing both of those. So that I think is like really crucial. But like literally, like it is the time to like just get a cheap laptop, get a DAW, and like get going and reference. And like Gloria was saying, like reach out to your friends and like just start experimenting and doing testers, and tell them like, hey, I'd love to do this. If you hate it, you don't have to use it. And and that's I mean, that's what I did. I just reached out to friends, and I would give them CDs and be like, you let me know what you think. And then one thing led to another, and then one person tells the other person, tells the other person, then you get like a really, really good gig with money. So
I think that's absolutely a great way to look at it, is that, you learn it by doing it, and or even simpler, you do it by doing it, right? The best way to get started on doing it is just to do it. And of course, everybody is going to make mistakes as they go, or is going to learn. And like we had said before, each new project is a new set of challenges, a new set of skills that you end up learning, solve problems that you know the next time how to tackle, and and just keep going. I think that's really good advice. I had an interesting thought just because from my own experience, and I wanted to see if any of you had a good story about this. What is the craziest note that you've gotten in terms of asking for a reference or an idea from somebody when they give you a project and say, hey, I want it to be like this? What's the craziest thing that you've gotten as a request from a client? Gloria, I see you smiling. It seems like you have an idea.
It's not, it wasn't about a reference. It was just a really tiny request. The client asked me he's like, oh, I love the mix. I think it's just missing one thing. Can I hear the vocals minus 0.1 dB? And I'm like, oh, you mean minus 1 dB? And he's like, no, minus 0.1 dB. And I said, okay. And I sent it off, and he's like, that's perfect. And I just, you know, at this point, I just do whatever I'm asked, because at the end of the day, it's about making the client happy. But every now and again, you will get those nitpicky things that don't matter. But I just kind of go along with it. And that's not the craziest, but I mean, that just happens. So it's fresh in my mind.
No, that's super entertaining. And, there's always the possibility that somebody can hear the difference of 0.1 dB.
Maybe.
I mean, it's totally possible.
I definitely heard the difference.
Yeah, no, it's
in a vacuum sealed hyperbaric chamber.
I got a request once for a mix from a pop artist who was writing really interesting, really cool, very creative songs. And he sent one track to me and said, the thing that I'm looking for from this is a combination of Animal Collective and the Yeezus album. Mm-hmm. And it was like, and both of those things obviously don't sound anything like each other, and they sounded absolutely nothing like the track that he wanted me to work on. But in a weird way, it was actually super inspiring and super cool for somebody to give an idea like, okay, mix cheese with, chocolate or something, and you're like, okay, we'll see. But in trying to solve that problem, like we've talked about, all of this is in a way problem solving. By trying to make that equation work, I ended up pushing myself to do things that I wouldn't have otherwise thought to do, and ended up doing things that the client never thought that they wanted to hear. And it was actually a really exciting result for all of us. And I was really glad in the end that he'd given me some very strange reference ideas, because it made me pull the things from both of those sources that were a way to enhance parts of his project that I wouldn't have thought needed it. So anybody else?
Yeah, well, sorry, just to jump in. Yeah. And many times I feel like the client doesn't know exactly what they want out of those references. So it's really about digging. It may not be the mix. It may just be, hey, I love the way the drums are treated here. I love the vocals on this thing. So it really requires, digging and asking questions and really getting specific. But that's what I found. It's never that black and white. It's really about digging and finding exactly what they want out of those references.
Right. It's all about dialogue.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's true. I mean, it's like there is this expectation with mastering. Like, people think like, oh, I'm going to send my mix to the mastering engineer. It's going to come back perfect, call it a day. And then when it comes back, like not sounding the way they want it to, they just like pivot to someone else without even giving you any revisions or notes. It's like, look, if you don't send me any notes or create a dialogue, I'm just going to go with what I think it is. And what I think it is might be completely off base with what you think it should be. So there has to be a dialogue. Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is kind of why I don't really like to do mixing as much, like consistently remote, because like you said, like people really don't know what they're looking for half the time, and like it's a very fine line to where I'm just like, I'm doing too much or not enough. So I feel like at least for me, like I let people know like I can do mastering for vinyl or whatever, but it's a very it's a digital process. I'm just making things sound loud and like pronouncing certain things that aren't like hitting as hard as they could be. But yeah, I feel like I haven't really had any like nightmare, just like funny stuff, like nothing that's like a crazy experience that I could even like think of right now. But yeah, like the mixing is where you can really get into some crazy stuff, like the 0.1 dB. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
I think there's something also there, though, that, you know, you make a really interesting point, Isaac, about how it's important also to not overcomplicate it, right? Like we can think about all of these creative notions about, you know, oh, I want it to sound like it's coming through the door in, you know, a basement or something, or you can think about those sorts of minor cues or minor differences, but also in some ways it's also good to step back and just try to simplify and figure out what's the minimum that needs to be done. And like Heba had said earlier, you know, there are some things where you just have to also know, hey, I'm not necessary here. You know, Gloria did an amazing mix and her rough master is as refined as it needs to be. It's good to go, right?
Yeah.
Josh, do you find there are things where you take yourself out of the process because you feel like you're not, it's not as much needed, or that it doesn't need to be more complicated?
I literally did that this morning. There was this artist that I work with named Daniel Wohl. He's a really fancy film and TV composer guy, this savant level musician and composer. I mean, a guy that can manage tremendous sessions of 120 tracks, and he knows what every little thing is. And mixing his stuff is always really fun for me because it's so difficult, and because he's so specific about what he wants. He knows exactly what he wants, and he knows exactly how to talk about it. Well, there were a few times where he would send a thing to me and saying, it's a mess, I need to mix this. And I had to tell him, like, you know, buddy, this is really good. You're tripping. I could maybe, spend a week and make it 1 or 2% better. Is it really worth your time, my time, all the, whatever? It's probably not worth it. It's probably better to send it to a nice mastering engineer to take it over the finish line instead of giving it another mix phase. A lot of that happens. I find that this happens with artists who aren't as sure of themselves about their production. And a lot of times they are justified in being unsure of themselves about their production because it's terrible. And that's fine because they're not required to be engineers. That's why engineers exist. But pretty often for me, I'd say a good chunk of the time, I get something from an artist saying, I really want you to mix this. And I listen to it and said, look, man, this is already terrific. Like, what am I really going to be adding to this? Is that 1% going to be noticeable to anybody? And the week spent getting that 1%, it's like charging an iPod back in the day. Like you plug it in and 80% of it's charged in an hour, and then the last 20% takes the rest of the day. Is it really worth going that far to get 1%? Sometimes yes, but I tell people a lot of the time, you don't need me.
There's a little bit of hand holding.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about the psychology of it, because you are, as an engineer or a producer or anything like that, mastering engineer, you have to be a bit of a psychologist, because artists will come to you and say, I want it to be a little more purple, or I want it to be a little more sunny. And you have to parse what they're saying. Gloria was touching on this earlier, right, where you get an artist that doesn't really know the technical terminology for how to talk about a very specific thing. Sometimes artists come to me and say, I need a little more air at 10K. Okay, that's easy. Otherwise, you have to interpret what they're saying and try to get at the meaning in the words. And it involves psychology, and every artist is different about it. They use different words to describe what they think is their own music.
Make it loud but dynamic.
Loud but dynamic.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to go really louder, but I want to preserve the dynamics. I'm like, well, we're at -9 lofts. We're peaking at 0. It's fine. And RMS is at -3.5. We're fucking loud right now. I can go louder.
Right.
You will not gain dynamics by me going louder. You will lose dynamics, but we can go a little. We can go to just turn the whole wave file into just a square. Just a bratwurst. Just the perfect. I've done it. I've been asked to do it. I have to do it. I hate doing it, but sometimes that's what they want, and that's you get the guy coming in with some techno banger that he wants it to be absolutely crushing, and
right.
So we
actually
work.
That brings up an interesting part of the conversation, and I would just want to get through this one last question, and then maybe we can get some of the Q&A from some of the folks who are watching. But I'm curious if all of you can talk a little bit about that question of loudness, especially now that there are all of these different questions of how loudness is factored in the streaming services, and how people are encountering music is so much different in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years than it was longer before. And how do you find squaring all of that?
I don't care about it.
Okay,
Yeah,
good
I was
answer.
going to say, I was
I don't give a
like, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
a thing, but I feel like we should all actively not care about the streaming, at least that specific thing. It's like, yo, whatever. Like, people are already using the streaming service, and if it sounds decent, is good. But also, like, it's not a make or break thing. Because I've had people ask me for like a streaming master, and I'm like, no.
Me too.
Literally, I
I-
just said no.
No, I don't do it. I don't do it because my theory is, well, first of all, those algorithms are changing like every day. So what's going to happen in
Yeah.
5 years? Like, are we going to be remastering records that we mastered for -14 LUFS? No. And you know, honestly, if it's gonna bump it down, because it's literally just a sound check normalization thing. If it's gonna bump it down like 3 dB, like whatever, I don't care, because in essence, you can remove the sound check function. Like, you can undo the preference. So I'm not gonna master for a preference. I always tell the artist, like, let's make this sound good now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when we're long dead, not for like the moment.
Yeah.
Right. Good point. Sure.
And you know what? I've actually encountered an issue when I finish a mix and I print my pseudo master, of making it too loud so that when we get the master back, it's not as loud. So I've actually had to start printing my pseudo masters that I give to the artist to listen to a lot less loud. Because a lot of times they'll get it from the mastering engineer and they're like, oh, well, it's not as loud. And I'm just like, well, there's a lot more going on. But to avoid having to get into that technical conversation, I've been printing my pseudo masters a lot less loud.
It's a good idea. You don't want to dunk on your
Yeah.
mastering engineer too hard. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
actually really
artists,
funny.
artists half the time they just hear louder and they go, "Oh, it's better."
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's everyone. I think that's everyone. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
definitely
Most
me
people,
with
like,
my
"Oh,
own
louder is
stuff.
better," which is
Yeah.
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 There
I
is
go
a
through this
law
stuff
of
with Raph too.
there's like a law of diminishing returns once you kind of get that sweet spot of loudness, and then you go beyond. Like, if the artist expects it to be even louder, it's just going to sound distorted or
Exactly.
completely flatlined. So and if I get a mix and I get like a rough master that's like insanely blazing, like my master almost all the time, I always preface it by like, playing on like perceptive loudness versus like actual like, extreme blazing compression. That to me goes a long way. And it's always just comparing, like being like, if your chorus ends up sounding so much more ducked than your verses, then, you're losing sort of that relationship. But yeah, I think not cornering the mastering engineer is definitely a good thing to do, but it is difficult because you have like all these labels and A&Rs that like, if it's not like insanely loud and that instant gratification, then you lose the job. How do you win? You can't win.
Yeah.
I think, I had an experience where I was mastering something, and it was a very, very young artist who was writing great music, but their comparison was to listen to the master that I'd sent over and then switch to Spotify on their phone, and they're approving masters through AirPods on a phone. And it was a very frustrating process to try to explain why going louder wasn't going to make it better. And in fact, the comparison that they were making between the file I'd sent and what they were listening to on Spotify wasn't actually a good way of hearing how it's going to sound on Spotify. Of course, it's very hard to also explain that Spotify isn't the be all and end all of experiencing music, but that is, to some artists, very important. And it's understandable that, that's where their audience is.
Yeah.
Right. There's the whole playlist game too.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, like that they've become such gatekeepers about like, if you get playlisted, then you're going to be exposed to a whole large audience and get thousands of listeners. And so you want to be competitive or just as loud as like the next person next to you. But you as a mastering engineer, it's like, I don't even know what playlist you're going to be on to even anticipate that. You could be like, you know, on the rock playlist or the indie playlist or the washing your dishes playlist. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think there's also a certain point in being a mastering engineer is knowing what is not part of your job and figuring out how to get somebody into the place, into the ears that they want to be in is not part of what you're doing. So let's maybe switch back to seeing if there's some folks who are watching who want to send some questions to us. Okay, so one question that we're getting is mixing your own music a worthwhile endeavor, or is it shooting yourself in the foot? Same for mastering. How do you get objective when doing yourself? I think this is a really cool question. I think this is really interesting because a lot of folks, and actually it seems like a lot of us here in the chat are folks who've gone through that route. So does somebody want to jump in on that?
I'm a big fan of mixing my own music.
Cool. Yeah.
When I'm producing, I mix as I go, so it's not even a distinct process. I mix my own.
There's no mix phase, girl.
But again, references are going to help you out a ton. Just find something stylistically that matches up to what you're doing and A/B.
Yeah.
I think for me, I come at it just from a very producer standpoint. Sorry about the horns, but yeah, I feel like the best thing that you should really focus on, not really like asking yourself the question of mixing or mastering if it's worthwhile, is just, am I getting my ideas out? Am I finishing what I'm making? Because that's really the end goal. If you're making in this application of your own music, it's like you want to be able to get that muscle memory and that like just practice of finishing your ideas and start it. Like for me, I mix as I'm making music just because I can't hear my idea come to fruition if it's like blown out or if it's super quiet. So I'm making things, the levels, oh my God, this horn, I'm making the levels make sense and like gain staging as I'm producing. So it definitely is like a necessity to me because I'm not gonna sit there and pay someone to like mix and master my music to put out. That's just like a lot for every release, just because for me, I put out music pretty consistently. And also it's like, at the end of the day, it's like you can do so much of the trial and error on your own if you export and like just literally like put a limiter on your thing and just put whatever, like for me, I learned how to master and like build my mastering chains off of Ozone presets, like just study the signal flow, because even though it's a digital application, everything still has an implied order. Like some things definitely are like a big no-go, but like it's really all to you. And like if you're getting that end goal to where you're happy and like it's giving you good results, that's the real thing you should be looking for in terms of your own music, I feel like. But when it comes to releasing, like I'll export a song like from beginning of inception to like finished quote unquote mastered state in like less than 2 hours if I'm really productive. But I just put that on my USB, then I DJ it out, send it to my friends, and then I just let it do its thing. And it's like, that's not the final file, but it's like, if I want to release it, then I can go back and be like, oh, like when I DJ it, this clap doesn't hit how I want it to, or like whatever. So I don't think you should really think about it being worth your time. I think you should really focus on getting everything done to where you're comfortable with. That's like the biggest takeaway.
That brings up a question that sorry, did I cut somebody off?
I was just going to say, I think it's genre dependent. Like, you know, with electronic dance music, like it makes sense to me that the artist mixes the stuff themselves for the most part. With certain other genres, like maybe rock or metal, like I can understand why, you know, you would need, you know, maybe a mixer, someone with sort of a hybrid setup, or maybe a proper room to like really finish it, especially if you've tracked it somewhere, or and you know, it depends. Like sometimes I get mixes from self-mixed people that are amazing, and then sometimes they're just garbage. So it just depends on the project.
I feel like the vocals really change everything up, because with vocal stuff, it's so many variables. But if you're really just producing, which I assume that this person was asking, it's pretty straightforward. I feel like there's only so much you can do unless you're like having a million instruments and like synths and stuff going on together. But yeah.
They also asked about mastering themselves. What do you? I know there's kind of generally a taboo on that, but I don't know if it's always so well placed. What do you all think?
I'm a big fan of sending my mixes to a mastering engineer.
Yeah.
I have mastered some of my mixes, but I mean, there's something about just being in a different space with a fresh set of ears that I think helps out a lot. So I will master my mixes sometimes, but I love just getting a fresh take on those mixes.
Sure. And the horn says yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like other people to mix my master. No one, and I mean no one, will ever mix my music except for me. But mastering, it's always someone else. Pretty much every time. My last record I did with Raphael Irisari, just because he's a buddy, and I went out there and for 3 days I clobbered him over the back of the head over every tiny detail, because I'm impossible to please when it comes to mastering. But he did great. He killed it. It's exactly better than I'd hoped, and I know I couldn't have gotten it there just because my ears were too close to the thing. So I think for mastering, unless you're really in a tight spot, you really should probably try to find somebody else to master it for you.
It seems like there's maybe also a bit of a split there too, because I think, Gloria, you were talking about doing rough masters after a mix. And I think for folks who are doing stuff at home, just to get it to that place of where they can feel that it's finished, might do well to do that. But I agree that when it's something that you want to release and put out into the world, it's probably helpful to have another pair of ears on it. Mm-hmm. So it might be two different stages. If it's just something to get yourself to a place to hear it, then yes. But yeah, I think to a final product, it's always good to have another engineer. Okay, we've got, unless anybody else wanted to chime in on that, I'm going to jump on to another question here. There are two related questions. Are there feasible treatments, room treatments for home and ad hoc studios, or are there other monitoring solutions? What if you can't have a room or monitors? Somebody's talking about, somebody who's living in a small apartment, so loud monitors are not an option. Does anybody have any suggestions for how to tackle stuff like that in a home situation?
First of all, don't work in a cubic room. So if your room is square, that's like literally the worst you could possibly have as far as like a monitoring setup. If loud monitors are out of the question, there are really, really good headphones now, like really amazing. Like I use the heads, which are, they are expensive, but think of it as like, taking the room out of the equation. I would say headphones are a good solution. Audis have really good headphones too. I think those are really pricey, but again, like it depends on the price point, what you're looking to spend. If you want to treat your room, there are definitely solutions. Like you can get, good traps. You can get, you can build your own cloud. There's lots of resources online, because usually most of the time people's rooms are too live sounding, and you kind of need to treat your walls so things are not bouncing around so much. So I would say there's that, and then there's on the higher end of the spectrum, like there are people that make these modular attack walls. I think it's a company called ASC. Again, those are really, really pricey. So it just depends on how much you want to spend.
I think one big thing that helped me, I forgot what year it was, but I got gifted a sub pack when I was still like living in my mom's place, and I never like listened to any of my music. Like I would play out all the time, and I would listen on my monitors, which were like literally like Logitech computer speakers with a little sub. So like I knew if my bass was like good and like what I was producing sounded how I wanted to. But the sub pack really like kind of showed, I was like, I didn't know that the snare had bass to it. Like I was listening to like all my songs just being like blown away, because it's like such an exaggerated thing that like I wouldn't say to ever use as like a make or break reference, but it's just like is so overwhelming and telling that you're like, all right, this all does matter. Because that at that point I was still pretty like not really worrying about EQing a snare. I'm like, it's a snare, like it sounds good, whatever. But then now I'm like, definitely always critical about it. And it's like second nature, and it doesn't take a lot of time. Like I just cut the low end of stuff that I don't want to be a main low end thing, but sometimes that like is a nice balance to add dynamic to the song. So it's really up to you, but a sub pack is definitely like, it's not too expensive, but it also is like insane and kind of counterproductive at times, because like I'll just space out and like listen to music on there and not even work on stuff because it's like it just vibrates your vision and it's insane. That could help a lot for just not being able to like hear the low end, and also for people that like aren't able to play out. That's like a big thing that I'm kind of like, I was spoiled to be able to like test my things outside of my room, and I know a lot of people aren't able to, especially now. So definitely like anything that has a low end, like even headphones, like as long as there's low end that you can hear in other songs and then like compare your songs to those, like yeah, there's a lot of different things, but I would say a sub pack if you have like, I think they're definitely less than like $300 something, but they can help, but definitely don't rely on it too hard.
Just for a second, I wanted to throw something out because we were talking about this question of mixing your own stuff and finding the balance there. There's this question that always comes up both for producers and artists, but I think it also is relevant for mixing, and I think to a degree for mastering too. This question of how do you know when something is finished? Where do you know where to stop? And I'm sure it's different for every question, or for every situation, but does somebody want to jump out and tackle that one?
You don't.
Yeah, it's a hard question.
You just give up.
Eternal.
When you can't hear it anymore? Yeah.
You just stop. You just walk away from it. You're like, okay, I can't really do anything more for this, and it's done. As much as it can be, nothing's ever finished. I mean, I don't think I know. I guess I've been making music about 26, 27 years now. I don't know anybody that's ever finished anything perfectly, like 100% finished. No
Sure.
one.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll help to break.
Don't know that they have. Yeah.
It could help to break things down into, or at least for my brain, like I would see everything as like the DJ 3 knobs, low, mid, high. That definitely like inspired me to kind of just break it down to that, because like I group all my things as that. Like I'll just have a group where it's all my low end, and then a group with all my like definitely more piercing high end stuff, and then like anything that falls in between I'll just put in the mids. So that can help a lot in terms of just like listening to those things in tandem, like just by themselves, and just seeing if they like are muddy at all. And like that's pretty much it, because I'm just like, all right, my low end is hitting how I want it to, and then the highs and mids aren't clashing at all. That's all I can really ask for. And then from there, you're always going to find things that you like want to change, but that's what you got yourself into, making music.
That's how I master. I always, not necessarily by grouping, because obviously I'm working with a stereo mix most of the time. Like I mentally divide the track into low, mid, high. And so when I'm working on a track, and let's say I mastered another song, like, you know, an hour ago, and that I'm feeling good about, I'll put that in my comparison track. So when I'm like A-Bing on my console, I have my what's on my desk and then what I just mastered. And so when I'm going back and forth, I listen to the low end, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I listen to the mids, back and forth, back and forth, and then the highs. And if everything kind of feels somewhat in the same world, then I know, okay, this is sounding okay, let's move on.
Yeah. Also a more cheesy actual thing that helps me sometimes is like in my studio, I literally have just like a school looking poster, just audio mixing and mastering, like handbook thing that's like huge on our wall. Just so like, if I'm really there, like questioning myself, it's like steps of like a bunch of different little things. Like I wish I had a picture of it I could pull up, but it's just like, you can like look up like mixing and mastering like poster, and just having it as a physical thing in front of you with like implied steps can really help, just because I'm like, all right, what am I even doing that's like making this not work for me? So that helps sometimes, just to have a poster for motivation.
Gloria, any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a mix is never done. I've listened to mixes months down the line and can hear a million things I do differently or want to change. So I actually try not to listen to things I've mixed. But you know, if I get to a point where I feel like I'm losing perspective, or I feel like I'm doing too much, I will toss it to the client, the artist, or the producer. and just tell them, hey, this isn't done, but I just wanted to know your thoughts, just to get, another perspective. But yeah, I mean, you could go on forever, but it's really about keeping the lines of communication open. And once it's approved, it's approved. Or if there's
Deadlines
a
are also
deadline,
good.
exactly. If there's a
Yeah.
deadline,
Yeah.
then that helps too.
Budget.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, give yourself
I-
deadlines. That could help.
Yeah. I think also one thing that I've always learned is whenever I'm working on my own stuff and constantly overthinking things, and sometimes like I'll do a mix that actually ruins what I'd done before, and then going back and trying to undo that process. Sometimes the best thing is to just start something completely different and get a new perspective and come back to it later, because often something is more finished than you realize and you're just spinning your wheels. So there's another question that's come in from the group. Can anyone share a favorite technique for sculpting tracks occupying similar frequency ranges? I think they're talking about within a mix where you have channels that have similar frequency ranges. Anybody got some thoughts on that one?
Sure. As far as bass and kick, obviously a lot of times they will, take up the same frequency range. You can do side chaining, which helps in a lot of electronic and dance music. Also, I'm a big fan of the FabFilter Pro Q3. And it actually has a feature where it will show you, it sort of has this glowing red light sort of in the back of sort of on the GUI, and it will show you the other instruments that are occupying that space. So I mean, you go in and you sort of carve that out until you can hear each element clearly, and that's really it. But those are the
That's
two
very cool.
techniques that I kind of go to.
You probably have enough space, generally with two things that are sort of occupying the same frequency range. You probably have enough space to sort of slide them off of each other a little bit, and using something like Pro Q3 or Isotope Neutron will give you sort of visual aids to see what's happening where, and then you can just sort of move EQ points or pull out problem spot in one that's rubbing against the other one, and then boost whatever's right next to it to make a little extra nudge outside of where the other one is happening. I don't know if that's making sense, but yeah, you can generally, like, if two things are like this in a mix, you can sort of separate them frequency wise by shaving them down a little more. And I think Gloria's right. Pro Q3 it's the most powerful EQ ever made, I think.
I have two notes for that, like similar to kind of what Josh was saying. Like for me, it's like balances. Sometimes it's balances that really kind of help separate, like not necessarily compression, maybe sometimes a little bit of EQ, but really balance really helps, like pushing your kick or the attack of the kick really helps it kind of cut through better in comparison to where the bass line is, for example. My second favorite thing, especially when I'm mastering, because it's a stereo mix again, my favorite EQ is the DMG Audio Equilibrium, and it has a frequency spectrum analyzer that overlays like your sides and your mids. And like my favorite trick is to cut out a little bit of the sides in where the kick is, because it suddenly focuses up the center, and you can really, like when you bypass between it in and out, you can really hear like how much more focused the kick can be, because like there is some side information that like eats up a lot of headroom and eats up a lot of energy that suddenly makes it feel so much more clustered and clunky. Mid-side work for me is like always the go-to.
Yeah, I think mid-side is great for mastering because it gives you, in a way, a few different dimensions other than just the stereo mix that you can kind of sculpt. I also think that the Surfer EQ, there are a couple of good dynamic EQs out there. If you have two things that are on in a similar frequency band, you can start to duck relative from one channel to the other. But yeah, of course, sidechaining can open up a whole bunch of other time-based problems too. So that's something to be careful about. Obviously, the simplest and most static solution can often do a lot. Okay, I'm just gonna, since we're kind of getting down close on time, I'm just gonna look at a few of these other questions. And then actually there was one that came in specifically for a few specific folks. Okay, one came in for Isaac, asking, can you speak on the importance of community-based resources for audio engineering? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, let me just think for like a split. All right. Yeah, I feel like it definitely is important to have a sense of community and like where your like role is in everything. I feel like I'm lucky enough to, like I mentioned earlier, be an artist first and focusing on that and not really expecting anything like even financially from it. So the whole audio engineering thing definitely like fell in my lap, and I could see like where I'm useful and where I'm not. But in terms of like actual resources and like gear, the biggest help has just been like having a studio space. Because before like less than 2 years ago, I was always just bedroom everything, like living where I create. So getting a studio space slowly kind of just inspired me and my three other friends that I share my space with, that we all collaborate together. Like we're just always eyeing like expensive gear that we're never going to afford, like this Apollo rack interface that we have now, but we have 4 people total to split the cost with.
Cool.
So that has really helped a lot, like especially when it comes to, like the speakers and interface and like mixer, like the real expensive like and meaty parts of like our operation. We split between all 4 of us, so that has been like the biggest level up, because in general like it takes so much like of the pressure off, because like we'll all do our research together, have group chats, talk about what the pros and cons are of like buying a piece of gear or if it's really going to help. But yeah, mainly like just having people to like split costs with has like been the biggest eye opener, just because now I'm like, all right, we could maybe get these Genelec monitors that we never thought we'd be able to afford.
Sure.
But yeah, for us, like it's pretty simple. Like I really just have a big Soundcraft mixer, Apollo rack interface, some 8-inch monitors, and a Yamaha sub. It's nothing crazy. It is a lot of money, but like splitting that between the 4 of us has made it like possible in general. So community could definitely help with all of it, but I feel like your initial just having the inspiration to be in that is what really is going to like shape your like the community sense of like being in the whole thing. Because if you do it alone and you're not into it in general, like I don't think you should really like do it. Like I don't know, for me it was just like a very manic like necessity just to make my things loud and like dynamic and stand next to this like all the music that I'm into and that's mastered and like like dealt with by professionals. So yeah, I don't know, it's really just find some people that you can feel supported by, whether it be just creatively, financially is the best, because like if you have friends you could share a studio space with, it's like nothing but good things could happen out of it. But not everyone can do that. So yeah.
That's really great. I love that answer. All right, so we've got time for only just one more question, and we got a bunch of questions that are similar to like asking what's your specific vocal processing chain or what's your mastering bus chain. And so instead of asking any of you to give away your secret tips or a secret sauce, instead what I'd love to do is maybe ask each of you to talk about 1 or 2 tools that you find are really essential. We've already sort of talked about the Fab Filter EQ and a few other things, but if you want to talk about either a signal chain or a tool that you find really crucial to specifically what you do, it'd be great to hear.
Tool. I would say for me, I really like saturation and some of the transient stuff that some plugins are doing. I sometimes find that like saturation does a better job than compression, especially on the mastering end.
Yep.
And I have become a bit of a like any kind of saturation unit that comes out, I'm like, I want to try it. So yeah, I have like all sorts of like rack transformers and tube saturation units and all that. But you know, for people that are like doing stuff at home, like there's like really great saturation plugins now, like namely the Black Box HG2. I really, really like that plugin. I have the unit and I have the plugin and I use them both.
Cool.
And yeah, I would say that's like one of my favorite things is just like saturating. And I'm not talking about like a lot. Like sometimes it's just like literally like 2%, 3%. It just gives it like a little bit of like, it gives the snare a little bit of an attack, gives the kick a little bit of a punch. Like it just gives like a nice glow to any kind of sawtooth synths or whatever. So that I think is like my favorite tool I would recommend.
I love like heavily saturated basses and
Yeah.
even distorted 808s. And oftentimes I get the question about how to best make 808s and basses poke through on small speakers, and that's definitely my go-to for that.
That's great. Yeah, I think, balancing saturation with distortion or so it doesn't get too far into distortion, or finding the right
Exactly.
sweet spot. And also everything has different types of saturation and different color and character. So I think a lot of people will enjoy or get a lot of benefit out of finding their particular recipe about which emulations or which circuits will do the most. Josh, Isaac, do either of you guys have a tool or a signal flow that you think is really helpful?
Yeah. Well, for my like final mastering, I just use Ozone. But I would definitely recommend just Ozone in general. I use a lot of the Waves, like whole bundle, the Wave suite, just for mixing and like little just character and like color to my stuff. But I definitely feel like my biggest workflow and signal flow and just like tool is Ozone, because I use the, like when you download Ozone, you can install it as a VST, of course, or as a standalone. And for me, I think this is like, I should have brought this up earlier, and like pet peeves, I guess, the kind of would fit into this is like a lot of people think, at least in my application and experience with producing, is I just hate trying to like master inside of the DAW project, if that makes sense, like inside of like where you're arranging and creating. So to like kind of just like round it all out, like I use the VSTs, like, because you can use the individual modules of Ozone as VSTs. So I'll use those like all the time when just mixing down and stuff. But then when it comes to my final mastering, because like I do this for any song, no matter what, if I'm putting it out or just wanting to listen to it, like I'll get my mix sounding nice, have it, my goal is to just like at 0, sit nice, peak in the red, whatever, at the loud parts, and then just -6 it. And then I'll open up the standalone version of Ozone, and then I'll start working from there, just from scratch, like just do it like that. Because if your mix is like solid at 0 and like sounds nice and like loud, whatever, then that's it. And like for mastering, I just duck the volume, give myself some headroom to work with, and then just, yeah, crank it up to whatever loudness I see is fit. But I feel like it's definitely helpful to kind of like step outside of your place where you're creating and arranging, because then like if you just slap it on your master channel, then you're like having the option to like see all your tracks and be like, oh, I can turn this down 0.2. But it's like if you export that -6, then you're kind of like, all right, it's set and done. And then if you do the master and it still sounds bad, then you have to open your DAW again and then do it. So you kind of like, it's definitely like disciplined me to kind of just not like have everything like squashed together and like going on, like too much going on. It definitely is like a lost in the sauce feeling for me if I'm like in the project still and then throw Ozone on the whole master. I'm like, I don't know what is like going on where. So it definitely helps to just do like a headroom export and then throw it in a standalone if you can, and then just master it like that.
Very cool. Josh, any thoughts?
The glue compressor that comes bundled with Ableton Live.
It is really good, right?
Just put it on your just put it on your 2Mix. Right click the title bar of it, and you'll see a thing that says oversampling. Select that. You want the oversampling. Put it in soft clip mode. Get it so that the meter's barely just taking the very top edge off of your mix, just about a dB. Profit. Everything I've mixed for the last, I don't know, 7-8 years since they started bundling it with Ableton Live. That's look, I'm giving you all some serious insight into my shit here.
Yeah, I'm gonna try this out.
Like,
I didn't even know about the oversample.
That's my trick. Yeah, oversampling also in Ableton. Their EQs are sort of workhorses. They don't necessarily sound wonderful, but they get the job done. You can also right click the title bar in the Ableton EQ and oversample on those two. I recommend it. It just makes it a little, just ever so slightly more silky and a little less harsh. Gloria earlier mentioned FabFilter Pro Q3. It is the absolute holy grail of corrective EQs, in my opinion. Of course, I haven't tried the one that Heba was talking about, the damage audio. But so I love Pro Q3. I love all the iZotope stuff. Ozone is a really powerful tool and can get you really close to a pretty terrific master with relatively a little amount of work. Extremely powerful tool, and I use also iZotope Neutron a lot for mixing as well. It's just kind of an overall channel strip that is uncolored and sort of transparent and just effective at carving up a track. Then finally, I love the Plugin Alliance stuff. They do sort of really terrific kind of recreations or codings of very specific pieces of hardware, and they do it really well. Their SSL channel stuff is great. Their SPL stuff is wonderful. They made this, I think it's Plugin Alliance that makes this saturator that Heba was talking about. It's pretty terrific for a software saturator. Like I use that one a lot. And the only other little tip I would say is Black Friday sales for buying plugins, because everything just gets. That's when you go. That's when you just go absolutely just fucking bonkers buying software.
Sound toys. They always have great sales.
I got the Sound Toys bundle like 2 years ago.
Same.
For like $100 or something.
I got it like a year ago. It's changed my life.
It's crazy.
Valhalla.
Just buy your plugins. Yeah, Valhalla. Well, Valhalla stuff's pretty cheap anyway. It's kind of,
it's really cheap.
They got free stuff too.
The only other thing that I would chime in on that I love as well that are great tools are the BX suites, like the Brainworks BX Mix
is Plugin Alliance stuff.
Plugin Alliance does those, and they're also on UAD. And the BX3 is a great, like Heba was talking about, mid-side processing is really helpful, and that EQ is just, that's on everything that I work on, as well as their multi-band saturator, or I guess it's a mid-side saturator. Those are great ways to get saturation and get stereo field really nicely done. And I have to say, I know this is corny to say, but the best tool that you can ever rely on are your ears and patience.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's such a dad comment to make. I hate to do it, but I sound like an instructor. But really, the more time you spend doing any mixing and mastering, the better you'll get at it. Like everybody here, all of your experience is perfect. Perfect example of all of that. And yeah, just patience and time and listening. It'll all yield results. Guys, this was awesome. This was such great answers, so much wisdom, so much insight. Thank you. Hey, Amanda.
Hi, thanks so much, Kevin, Gloria, Heba, Isaac, and Josh for everything today. You guys were amazing. Thanks for tackling all of our questions. We had tons more, but I'm glad that we were able to cover so many in the time provided. That is it for this episode of the Ghostly Knowledge Share. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Our next one is going to be in just a couple weeks on Thursday, November 19th, and we'll be talking about collaborating. So be sure to tune in then. And that's it for today. Bye.